All right, well, once again, nonfiction branders, welcome to IMNSHOW, my not so humble opinion show, where I get to talk about whatever happens to have tripped my trigger over the past week or so, or we're going to be doing what I'm doing tonight, which is an actual live stream of a recording session for my nonfiction brand podcast, which, of course, you'll recognize looks a little something like this. Now, the Nonfiction Brand podcast comes out every single Monday, but in order for me to actually get that edited every Saturday, I have to do a session with somebody, an interview, via, in my case, I'm now using Ecamm Live interview mode, which is really, really cool, to be able to do this live to 5 different live streaming platforms, including LinkedIn Live, Facebook Live, Twitch, Twitter, and YouTube Live. And guess what? I get to do all that for $0, absolutely free of charge, because you can actually present yourself and your personal brand to the world pretty darn easily, pretty darn cheaply. And we're going to be talking about that with my guest today, who I'm really excited to introduce you to. His name is Dom Brightmon, and let me get that out of the way because I need the room to show you his smiling face right there. Welcome to the Nonfiction Brand podcast, Dom. Dom is short for something, right?
Oh yeah, I made it kind of like a pygmy. It's short for Dominique.
Yeah, Dominique. So I can understand why you want that a little bit shorter because especially you can see on the screen right there, it says Dom Brightmon, which is a nice 1-syllable, 2-syllable name, just like DP Knudten. Well, that's got a few more syllables involved there, but either way, it becomes very easy to say. I was talking to Dom on the phone, and I bet you that not a lot of people know a lot of Doms in their life, so it's like you're one of one. It's certainly in my life, you're the only Dom I know. So if someone said to me, I was talking to Dom, I know the Dom they're talking about, and that is Dom Brightmon. Well, anyway, welcome to the Nonfiction Brand Podcast. It's great to have you on, and I want to talk to you about what you're doing to build your personal brand, your small business brand. Is there a difference? Not in my humble opinion. And I want to get your take on all that stuff. So why don't you start by giving us a brief introduction to who you are, what you do, and how you do it.
Yep, sure thing, DP. Well, it's an honor to be on your platform, especially with this new format you're doing. It is freaking sick, man. It's freaking sick. And for those who don't know, name's Dominic Dom Brightmon. Dom for short as easier because, nonfiction brand. Folks like realness. Folks like vulnerability. Folks like genuine folks. So it's like, hey, let's make it easy for folks. And I'm a certified self-leadership trainer with the John Maxwell team who likes to encourage folks to create their own piece of immortality, whether that's starting their own podcast, writing and publishing their own book, or even just getting to their next level in life of high peak performance. So that's really in a nutshell of what I really do. And it's kind of interesting how I got here.
Well, it's also interesting how we got connected. And, frequent listeners to the Nonfiction Brand podcast will recognize the fact that for the first 3 years of me putting out that podcast every single week, I relied on people I knew directly. I maybe worked with them in the past. I maybe have been in networking groups with them, or I'm familiar with their books and their podcasts and their content output. So it was always me reaching out to them to say, hey, I would love to have you on my podcast. And the funny thing is, and Dom, tell me if your experience varies as a podcast host, if you have a podcast and you invite someone on, your conversion rate on that ask to have them a guest is north of 90%. I mean, I've had a few people say no, thank you, but for the most part, even the quote bigger names that I've had, the bigger names that I've tried to get on my podcast have generally said yes because they understand the value of extending their name, their notoriety, their personal brands via other people's platforms, such as, in my case, the Nonfiction Brand podcast. But Dom, you've got a podcast, and frankly, that's how we met. via Podmatch. And again, let's tell me your experience and from your point of view, how did we meet?
Yeah, you're so right about that. Podmatch.com, like when I was first introduced to it from the founder when he was on LinkedIn, and heck, that's probably your favorite social media, my man DP, is the fact
Yeah.
that LinkedIn's for business folks. And I got reached out by, I believe Alex is his name, and when he was just starting it out, and I was like, okay, cool, I would love to get on more podcasts myself, and heck, you can always use some guests every now and then. But my goodness, that site actually connected me with so many wonderful people, and actually even took my podcast even higher than ever thought possible, because it's, I guess they call it the Tinder for podcast guesting. And you're so right about podcasting as in inviting people to be on. Like there's probably a 90+% chance that if you ask someone to be on your show, they're probably going to say yes. Like, oh my gosh, like why didn't you ask me sooner? Because the thing is, the internet is for real and it's forever. Like even no matter how big or small your show is, even if it's a small show, that content's still going to be out there somewhere for folks to find. And 2 years down the road, they may find you down the road and be like, hey, I heard you on the Nonfiction Brand podcast, and you're bringing the realness to this world of entrepreneurship. Like, let me have you on my show. Let me buy some of your books or invite you to speak at my organization.
Yeah, it's tremendous. It truly is a tremendous unlock or level up for anybody who wants to build their personal brand, build their small business brand in a way that allows them to demonstrate exactly who they are, what they do, and how they do it the best way possible, which is face to face, mouth to mouth, almost, literally talking. You totally get an idea of who someone is by seeing them, the way they speak, the way they look, the way they respond to questions, the way they demonstrate their expertise. All of these things happen very quickly and very easily on a podcast. So having a matching service like Podmatch to introduce me to people like Dom is fantastic. And I'll be honest with you, when I first got the notification, I think, I don't know, maybe they saw my name on Apple Podcasts or something like that, and they reached out because they want to build their user base, right? So Alex, again, reached out via, kind of a mass mailing. I didn't have a one conversation with him, but I did respond to that saying, okay, well, let me check out the service and see what's what. I go there, I fill out my little form about my podcast and about me as a guest, because they actually do it in a cool way. They allow you to be a podcast host, you can be a podcast guest, or you can be both on their service. Because here's the thing. I have a podcast. Does that mean I don't want to be a guest on someone else's podcast? Of course I want to be on someone else's podcast, because I can go on there and talk about my podcast. I can also demonstrate who I am, what I do, and how I do it, my personal brand. So it's a no-brainer, really. And, once I started using it, I'm very early on, I met you via Podmatch, and boom, now we have a connection. Now we have a friendship growing, and it's all because of a service that I pay $0 for. Now they have paid levels, and maybe someday I'll do one of those paid levels. But for now, I'm happy to get 90% of the cow and that milk for free, if you will, without buying the cow. So how about you? Is your experience with Podmatch the same?
Oh, it's freaking phenomenal, because at one point I was getting a lot more requests from guests looking to be on my podcast as opposed to in reverse. And for a while, I was kind of ignoring a bit of a few of them at first, and then I realized, wait a second, they have a gamification aspect to it. And the thing is, if you see life as a game, you'll probably have a lot more fun in this lifetime. So started inviting more people on the show, and as a result, like more guests, it kind of filtered back into the guest piece where you get to dive into both aspects. You can't just be one or the other. You can't just be like all white or all black. You can metaphorically have the both white and black mime shirt on and rock both. So it's been a great experience. Yeah, I'm on the free version as well. It's a great service. Like there's a couple other podcasts and guest sites I've been on in the past, and transferring the past information to this one, like this was probably been the best one. I'd say I probably secured at least probably anywhere between, I'd say, 20 plus guest appearances this past year from being on that platform. So it's definitely a great tool, and it's free.
Yeah. Yeah, I do not underestimate that because I know that you're like me. We're looking to leverage the finite amount of time, energy, bandwidth, and dollars we have available to promote ourselves. And I always look for what I like to call force multiplying platforms. Uh, Anything like a lever that can take my limited amount of strength and multiply that as far as possible. And here's the thing. By being on your podcast, I get exposed to your audience, and maybe I pick up a few listeners from that. They then become potential evangelists for my podcast. I become a potential evangelist for your podcast. All of a sudden, we've got this virtuous circle or a virtuous cycle of podcasty goodness that enables us to help each other out the most wonderful way possible, which is completely authentically. Because here's the thing. I'm not paying you to be on this podcast. You're not paying me to be on this podcast. We're doing this out of the, I would call it, smart strategic parts of our brain, but also because we both are, I would say, glass half full people, that want to put out positive energy into the world and actually help people understand how they can be more authentically themselves and and lean in to who they are, what they do, and how they do it. Now, I would love to talk about your podcast specifically. What's the name of it, and where can people find it?
Oh, sure thing. It's called the Going North Podcast. That's the Going North Podcast. And it's can be found on anywhere you can hear podcasts. So Apple Podcasts, Spotify, YouTube. Heck, it even has its own website, goingnorthpodcast.com. And really all about helping other authors get their voices heard. And it's about 500 plus episodes deep now, too. So it's been one heck of a journey with the show.
Well, that's the thing, though. I mean, yeah, 500 episodes, that's hard. I mean, that's a heavy lift. If you put it this way, if I said to you when you're on episode 5 that you're going to make it to episode 500, what would you have said to me?
Oh, you would have probably looked at you like you were crazy. Like, wait, so Dom, so you started the show. You're probably gonna go to like episode 500 in like 4 years time. Like, huh? What? Because funny enough, it actually, I think what helped with that show getting so big is that I kind of came in at the right time with the show because it was 2017 when the show launched. It was about a good 10 months after my first book was published, Going North, book of the same name. And I decided to enlist others in the journey of really helping others to advance in life by giving authors a platform to get their voices heard. Because a lot of authors, especially first time authors, they have no idea what the heck they're doing. And I'm a big encourager of the written word because, like, someone's writings have helped me to get to where I am today. Someone's wisdom from the past has helped me to get to where I am today. And I want to encourage other writers to have a platform to get their voices heard out there. So started that in 2017. Funny enough, 32 episodes later, get a pitch from one podcast guesting company, then a bunch of them start flooding in, and it's just been nonstop ever since. It was supposed to be a one episode a week sort of thing, but now it's 3 days a week.
Wow, that's amazing. But here's the thing. That's what happens when you put yourself out there, when you're authentically who you are, and you hit that play button. I mean, that's the biggest thing. I'm sure that you do the same thing, which is I talk to people and I say, you know what? Podcasting is just a fantastic way to build your personal brand. And they go, oh, I don't know. And, I get that. If you aren't a technically inclined person, there's a little bit involved to get your microphone hooked up and do all that stuff. But I got to be honest with you, it's minimal. The barriers to entry for this are so incredibly low when you consider the tremendous benefit you can accrue from it. So, like, I see people, and the funny thing is, and everyone on this who listens to this podcast knows this, I'm a writer. I write every day for other people, their communication, advertising, marketing, all that stuff. I should be a blogger, but I'm not. I don't know why, but for some reason, maybe it's because I write for other people all day long. I just don't feel like writing blog posts for myself. And for some reason, it's easier for me to churn out these podcast episodes, to edit them, to do all the scheduling and support and marketing of them. It's a whole lot easier for me than actually writing a blog post. And in my book, Nonfiction Brand, I talk about the fact that every social media channel out there has a style. Oh, you got your copy. Love to see that, Dom. Every social media platform has a style, and as does everybody else. And it's a stage. So it's an opportunity for you to demonstrate your style. And the thing is, depending on who you are, you may not choose to do everything, which I would recommend. Don't do everything. Do fewer things better.
Yeah.
But find the one that works best for you. In my case, it's podcasting. And I sense that it's probably podcasting as well for you, even though we both have written hard copy books.
Oh yeah, you could definitely say that again. It's heck, even since we're both speakers as well, like speaking is definitely fun for me, especially since sometimes I get these streams of consciousness that sometimes manifest as corny dad jokes for folks, and they gotta hear them whether they like it or not. If they laugh, it's even better. But if they don't laugh, I'm gonna laugh at it myself. So podcasting is definitely easier. Heck, even another reason why podcasting is so great. I think what holds most people back after they press the play button. I feel like folks need to press the play button when it comes to life. Press that button a lot more, take more intentional, immediate action on what you want to get out of life. Is the fact that once you get started, you have to keep going. Like consistency
Yeah.
is really one of those keys for explosive growth. And I'm sure you can speak heavily to that with all the amount of consistency you put into your own business.
Well, and that's the whole thing, because if you do this once every blue moon, you're not going to build an audience. And let's face it, that's to the benefit of anyone who wants to get started, because the reality is nobody's going to hear your first 10 episodes. No one's going to hear your first 15, 20, 25. Maybe if you'll start picking up an audience, and all of a sudden you'll be glad no one was listening to those first 10, 15, 20 episodes because you were still working out all the kinks and all the bugs and getting ums out. I mean, if you listen like I listen to you speak, you have very few ums, very few filler words, very few none of those vocalizations. Why? I'm guessing because you've done a little bit of editing of your own podcast and had to cut those things out. There's no faster way to get rid of saying than edit your own podcast. Because the second you do, you go, you know what? I can't say as much. And I can't talk over people. I need to ask them a question and let them respond. Is that something that you had as part of your bag of tricks before you were, before you started your podcast?
Oh yeah, definitely. I was actually in Toastmasters for about a good 3.5 years before I started my podcast, and it gave me an advantage and a disadvantage. The advantage was those ums, those ahs, those filler words, the you knows, the so's, all of it. I could hear all of it. That was a blessing and a curse, because the blessing is you get to hear all of them. The curse is you hear all of them. So it taught me how to pause in Toastmasters, and that was just really where it helped me to get to where I am with the podcasting. It made it a lot easier. And it also taught me to pause whenever I'm about to say a filler word, because when you pause, that leaves that air in there and you can cut the air out. However, sometimes when it's on the opposite side of the end of the spectrum, where it's like, oh, I'm on the opposite side of the mic, when I pause, I have to be careful, because sometimes hosts may cut in because they may like, oh, I got to get an edge in. They just stop talking. No, it's just a pause so folks can catch the moment. Sometimes you have to pause and let certain words sit for a while, because not everybody is working at the same speed mentally and physically.
Yeah, exactly. And that's why it's really important. But I find that doing a podcast makes me a better public speaker, makes me a better listener, makes me a better questioner or interviewer. And that aids me in every single part of my daily business. I mean, let's face it, if the worst thing you can do, especially in my business, working with people on communicating their businesses and what those services and products and stuff like that do, is to sit there and talk the whole time. So instead, it's better to ask a great question. Like, let me give you a great question, which is, I understand that you have a passionate love affair with libraries and books. Where did that start and why did it grow into what it is?
Ah, yes. That actually started in my teenage years. Fun enough, my lovely mother wanted me to get work experience, and she was like, "Hey, how about we go and I'll sign them up for a library. They might have a job," and got a summer internship. It was even a paid one, which surprised me even more because rare occasions where you have a paid internship, and I didn't do anything stupid, and they liked my work, so they invited me to come back a few months later after I turned 16 and stayed there for my goodness, 14 years of basically my whole life and really rose through the ranks, held the job in high school and college and even after college where they promoted me to full-time employment after getting my IT degree and heck even just really falling in love with reading and books again because the thing about books is the fact that in school they give you books that you may not want to read and may even make you hate reading, and that was my problem. But once I found out that, wait, I have a choice to read what I like, wait, there's books about leadership and productivity and persuasion and it can actually help me better my whole life. Like, sign me up. And I just fell in love with reading again after not only working in a library, but realizing I had an acres of diamonds there already and just tapped into the resources there, fell in love with reading and just took that to the next level.
Yeah, well, and obviously that gave you a foundation to really launch from because you have to have a broad knowledge base to be a decent podcaster. Now, you don't have to be an expert, but you need to be able to speak to experts. And that requires a little bit of information. Like, I'm sure you've had some pretty interesting guests on your podcast. I know I have. People that if I scratch the surface on what they know, I could probably be talking to them for 50 hours. But I guess what I'm trying to say is that as a podcaster, you don't have to be that expert. You need to be able to draw out of that expert valuable stuff. So, can you give us an example of someone you've had on your podcast that was like, wow, this is incredible stuff that I know just enough about to be able to make a decent podcast episode out of it?
Ah, powerful question indeed. I'd have to say one guest that stood out with that was probably be Pastor Travis Hall I had back in my Going North podcast. I believe he was episode 364, if I'm not mistaken, Seven Deadly Thoughts. And with him being a preacher, I thought, oh, he's probably talking about the seven deadly sins. When I went through the content preparing for the episode, I'm like, oh, this is not that. This is something totally different. And really, one of the major seven deadly thoughts he mentioned was the fact that some people get comfortable in certain areas of life to where they think they've arrived. And that's a deadly thought because people get in that level of comfort and it becomes a comfort zone at a different level to where they don't grow any further from that. They stay stagnant, may even become a little too prideful or even arrogant. And really just having a good time with them and realizing that he was also human too, because the thing is, we all have certain things alike, like with both you and I, DP, both being podcasters, authors, speakers, helping folks really in the real sense with real life, like those things we can connect with. Like both him and I were Christian. Heck, even some other folks I've had on the show in the past where even her episode isn't dropped yet at the time of this live stream, but a tarot card reader who actually calls herself a cancer dancer because instead of a cancer survivor, because she had caught it 4 times, but she gotten over it 4 times. So she sees it as a dance as opposed to just surviving. It was just a painful dance that she had to deal with. And once she got off that cancer dance floor, she's actually able to get to the point now where she's thriving without it. So it's just scratching the surfaces of those wonderful stories and having questions ready and being a little prepared ahead of time. And sometimes, like what you mentioned earlier, drawing out the gems from those people, you'll get new gems, especially if they can tell that you've done your homework. They'll have to drop a new story.
Yeah. Well, I love the fact that you pointed to that very, very special word, story. Everybody has a story. Everybody also has a voice with which to tell that story. The thing is, most people are not comfortable getting out there and sharing their story. And we all, everybody talks about authenticity so much so I think the word has lost its meaning or its bite. But I think what is meant by authenticity is the idea that people have a story and they should tell it. Because to be authentic, to be genuine, to be true to yourself, or what I like to say is to know yourself so you can be it, you have to be comfortable with getting out there and sharing your unique story with your unique voice. And that's something that I know that you talk about on your podcast with your guests. I know I talk about it ad nauseum on this podcast, but people cannot hear it enough, because if you are currently not doing stuff like this, not blogging, not posting your ideas, your concerns, your questions, and your answers, sharing of yourself, you are literally holding back, especially from the best that you can give to the world, which is your unique perspective. Well, Dom Brightmon, he's absolutely one of those people who's not shy. He's getting out there on a regular basis, up to 3 times a week on his Going North podcast, and doing exactly that, sharing his story. I hope you find him fascinating. And I know you will. But I also would love for you, let me say that again. But I'd also like you to be able to connect with him if you have any questions or maybe want to find out about podcasting, whatever it is. Dom, how can people connect with you online? Do you have a preferred social media channel?
That's a good question. Someone actually asked me that earlier today, like social media. I think my best preferred one, I'd have to say there are 3 that stick out: Facebook, LinkedIn, and Twitter. Twitter's mostly for the podcasting. Facebook, that's for the personal life and the memes. If you want to hear some corny jokes, that's cool. And of course, oh my goodness, LinkedIn for business. So any of those are good, but you can find them all at dombrightmon.com. That's dombrightmon.com. If you type Dom Brightmon in on any of those social media profiles, I will pop up instantly. So that's a good thing.
And once again, where can people get your podcast?
Sure thing. Oh, I also forgot to mention, if folks head over to dombrightmon.com, got a free giveaway called the 21 Lessons Learned from 4+ years of podcasting. Feel free to grab that freebie for those listening. And for those who want to hear the Going North podcast, it's there on dombrightmon.com as well. And anywhere podcasts are heard. So if you love Apple, you want to bite into the apple of Eden on Apple Podcasts, feel free to listen to it there. Amazon Music, Audible, heck, even Facebook lets me post the Facebook there. If you have the Facebook app on your phone, you can listen to it there. So if you know where podcasts can be found, you can find it.
Yeah, well, that's the beautiful thing about audio content. Everybody wants to host it because everybody wants to listen to it. And let me tell you, there's no better way to demonstrate who you are, what you do, and how you do it than a podcast, or especially a podcast that is live streaming like I am doing right now with Dom Brightmon. Thank you so much, Dom, for being on the podcast. Don't worry, Dom will be back next week for more of this scintillating conversation. But for now, I'm your host, DP Knudten, and I'd love for you to like, subscribe, refer this podcast to others, and most of all, review it, because that helps other people find it. So please Drop a 5-star review if you'd like, wherever you get this fine podcast for free. That's it for this week. As I said before, I'm DP Knudten, your host, and he is
Dom Brightmon.
And we'll be talking at you again next week. Bye-bye. Pause, pause, pause. All right, so we go right back into it. You wrote a book pretty darn early in your adult career or your adulthood at the age of 23. Now, I got to be honest with you. That's kind of amazing to me because my first book didn't come out till I was 50 plus. I'm not going to go into details on the age, sorry. But let's just say twice as old as you were when you came out with your first one. What drove you to write a book at that relatively tender age?
Powerful question. I actually wrote a book at the age of 23 because I was attending a Toastmasters meeting, and this young guy named Daniel Alley came to give a presentation, You Are the Boss. And since he was about a good 2 years older than me, he was like, I think he was 23 and I was 21 at the time. He sold his books after the presentation was over. I bought the book to support I'm like, hey, fellow young guy giving out speeches. I'm like, let me support a brother trying to bring some positivity in the world. As I was reading through the wonderful page turner he wrote, he was writing about the same things I was reading about. And lo and behold, hire him as a coach. Later down the road, I do an activity where I write my own personal obituary. And in that obituary, I mentioned that I was a best-selling author of multiple books. Well, a few months down the road after that activity, the door was right there, the door of opportunity to make that dream come true. Because I was networking with people and I was handing out these wonderful reading lists to people called the 100 Books Are Dynamic Living instead of business cards, because I'm pretty sure business cards, they either end up in the trash or forgotten. So I handed out reading lists. And plus, if there's books on there that they've read too, I have a new reading buddy. And one lady I handed the list out to, she looked at the list, looked right back at me, looked at the list, looked right back at me, and asked me, where is my name on this list as an author? And I'm like, I'm 20 freaking 2 at the time. Like, what the heck am I gonna write about? And she's like, you know what? How about a year from today, become a published author? I'm like, lady, you are crazy. I'm not doing it. Okay, how about we both become published authors a year from today? And I'm like, nope, not doing it. And a few days later, got into a Toastmasters meeting, did a Q&A, part of my presentation, and a buddy who I told about that encounter to asked me, when the heck was my book going to be published? And I'm like, man, my talk had nothing to do about writing a book, yet this guy right here put my feet to the fire. I said, a year from today, going to write my book. And then the book was published going north after running home scared because, darn, my feet was put to the fire, wrote 15 pages of raw content, and then put myself on a schedule to get at least 2 pages done every other weekend, if not every weekend, until up to that point.
Well, I tell you, do not underestimate the power of an example and the power of a challenge that someone basically double dog dares you to do. Because I, like you, same thing. I never considered myself an author. Even in advertising and marketing, I was kind of a sprinter. Short headlines, short body copy, get it done, get it out, move on to different things. I mean, I'd write for 4 different clients in an individual day because I like that kind of gadfly hopping from around the kitchen. I'm on a banana, then I'm over on some bologna, then I'm over here on some bread, just hopping, because that's the way my brain works. And I never considered myself a book length author, a writer of a book length thing. I'm like, I don't know if I could ever do that. But the funny thing is, people around me would say, you know what, you need to write that down. And I'm like, write what down? He said, what you just said. I'm like, what do you mean what I just said? I said, no, you're sharing valuable information. You're telling great stories. You're inspiring me just by listening to you to want to do more. Write that stuff down. Put it in a book so people can have it, so you can remember it, so you can share it with a whole lot of other people. And that kind of sat in my brain for another 10 years. But I saw somebody at a conference, a friend of mine, who had just come out with a new book, and I had already written one book with a co-writer, a co-author, and I wasn't going to write another book. I wasn't going to do my own book. And then I saw her with a brand new book, and it's just like walking down the street and seeing a friend of yours with a brand new baby. If you love children and you see that brand new baby, you're going to get jealous. You're going to start thinking. And one of the things you won't remember is how much pain that first child bringing into the world caused. So instead, you start going, yeah, I could do this. Especially when you do what you did, which was, I'm not going to bite this all at once. I'm going to take a little bite out of the elephant by giving myself a goal. I'll write 2 pages every weekend. Okay, that's doable, right? I'm guessing some weekends were, well, I only got 1 done, but others were, actually I got 6. Because, once you're on a roll, it gets better and easier. But none of this would have happened were you not challenged by somebody who was willing to challenge themselves. I love the fact that she said, why don't we both have a book in a year? That is the best type of challenge. It's challenge, but it's also holding hands. Let's jump off the cliff together. I think that's really, really cool.
Oh, yeah. Cooler than 2 cucumbers.
Yeah. Well, exactly. So what is Going North about?
Great question. Going North is about really taking yourself to your next level, developing a positive mental attitude that's rock solid, realizing that life is customer service, like taking really all the stuff that I've actually applied in my own life into a small package under 100 pages. Because the other thing, too, about the book itself is the fact that it's small because I had a deadline to make, for one, and two, people have a small attention spans these days. I think the goldfish have us beat still in terms of attention span. And really, it's really just the stuff that I've actually done in my own life that has worked for me. And heck, even with this wonderful podcast being the nonfiction brand and it being a nonfiction book, I have to make sure I'm the nonfiction author that's really putting this real, genuine message out there by putting the stuff that I truly believe in. Because I can't be out there teaching stuff that I truly don't believe in myself. That's really what that book is about. So if you want to read the book, that'll encourage you to write and publish your own book. This is definitely the book to pick up. And if you don't want to read it, I actually read it too. It's available on Audible. So if you put down the Reese's Cup, you can probably buy it for like $4.87
Yeah.
on Audible.
Well, exactly. And so once again, you're a writer, you're a podcaster. Now the podcaster is doing the live read of the book you wrote. This is what I mean by force multiplication. You've developed a skill set via podcasting. You've developed content via writing. And now you bring them both together to create another piece of content that allows people to find you where they want to find you. One of the big reasons podcasting took off is because people realize that, top 40 radio is pretty bad, and I'm sick of talk shows that are too political, or it's either sports or politics. Mm-hmm. I don't want either of those. I want something that's going to inspire me, to give me some life-affirming goals and tools, tips, hints, and tricks. I just want to, at the end of my 20-minute commute, or whatever it happens to be, I want to feel like I got something out of that commute. It wasn't wasted time. It was an opportunity to check in with smart people about smart topics that can make me a smarter person. And by the way, with the exception of a few, podcasts are free. I mean, I in an age where everything costs something, the only thing you have to pay for with a lot of podcasts is you have to listen to a few ads. And frankly, if you've got the right podcast client application, you can bop past those really easily just by fast forwarding a little bit. So why wouldn't you listen to a podcast over repetitive garbage radio? You know? But anyway, so you have been taking that foundation that you received via books and the library and continually building. When did you decide to join Toastmasters? Now, I've got a fair number of listeners who are outside of the U.S., so give us a quick explanation of what Toastmasters is.
Yep, sure thing. So, Toastmasters International is this wonderful nonprofit organization that's probably about, my goodness, it's close to 100 years old now. I think it was like 1900s it came about. And I joined because I was listening to one of Brian Tracy's audiobook programs, and at the end, it mentioned Toastmasters International. And I'm like, wow, okay, cool. Like this sounds cool. Like, what do they do? Do they talk about like keeping bread warm and maybe pulling out bottles of wine, whether it's red or white? And I'm like, oh, wait, they don't do that. They actually help you to become a better speaker and, if you so choose, a better leader. And I actually joined a club because I actually needed to network with other people and hopefully secure a speaker for a public speaking seminar I was doing at my church at the time. And after that seminar went off with a success, after securing a speaker, I decided to stay. And that was around 2013 when I joined, the fall that year. And I'm still a member today, 8 years later. Amazingly so, because Toastmaster International is one of those places where the more you put into it, the more you get out of it. We probably wouldn't even be on this podcast together if I didn't join Toastmasters back then, because back to my earlier story, the lady who challenged me and wanted to join me, she too was a Toastmaster. So you'll be in a nice environment if you join Toastmaster, because everybody there wants to grow and become better.
So it's part public speaking, how to become a more confident speaker, but it's also about meeting people who are like you, that want to excel, that want to be continually challenging themselves, making themselves better. I mean, so much of life, we're surrounded by negativity until you find the right group. And it's like you walk in and no negativity is allowed. Instead,
Amen.
it's all about helping each other out. It's about lifting each other up. It's about encouragement. And that doesn't mean there's not some critique involved, because you don't get better if you don't get coaching. But the best coaches inspire as much more so than they critique. And even their critiques can turn into truly inspirational stuff. And no, I totally get that. And it's very cool that you've stayed involved. But would you consider yourself a better podcaster because you did Toastmasters first? Or how did that work out? Which came first, Toastmasters or the podcast?
Oh, definitely Toastmasters, because the thing about Toastmasters, especially if you stay there for a while, you eventually have to take on a role called Toastmaster of the Day, where you're introducing the speakers for the evening. You're basically the MC of the evening. And part of podcasting, if you do a guest show like you're doing today, DP, like you're gonna have to really bring the energy and know how to introduce people. So I'd say the Toastmasters came first and made me a better podcaster, because not only catching filler words like crazy, but also being able to bring my personality and introduce people and bring in energy to it that folks need and love to hear, because you don't want to listen to somebody boring. It's like, oh yeah, let's read this whole entire biography. Like they were born in 1902 and are still alive somehow. Like, don't want to do that. Like actually introducing somebody like you did earlier today, man. So definitely Toastmaster may be a better podcaster.
Well, and that's the real value of something like that. It allows you to get your feet wet, and then your ankles, and then your knees, and then full body immersion. And it happens so gradually over time. And the thing that you haven't necessarily talked about directly is that the entire time you're watching people do it. You are seeing other people do it. And over time, your eye and your ear starts getting attuned to, oh, you know what, that he probably shouldn't have said it that way. Or, yeah, I think this is going on too long. And you're honing your taste, your quality, and you may not even know it, but you're becoming better almost osmotically. Literally, if you see someone speak and all they're doing is that drunken sailor thing of shifting their body weight from one foot to the other, you're going to, after 2 minutes, go, oh, don't ever do that. Literally, you've seen someone making the mistakes you don't want to repeat. Consequently, so when you get to that Toastmaster of the Day thing, you've seen some of the best Toastmasters of the day. You've seen some of the worst Toastmasters of the day, and you know the difference. And the first time you do it may not be the best, but you're well on your way because you have started developing what musicians would call an ear. Because, again, music doesn't exist on a page. Printed notes exist on a page. Music happens in the air. And, I'm right now on Netflix. No, it's on Apple Plus. No, it's on Disney Plus. Yeah, it's Disney Plus. The Get Back documentary about the Beatles when they did their Let It Be album is on. You see these guys, they are noodling around, they're trying everything, this doesn't work, that doesn't work, but they've developed their ears to the point where they know what good is. And when you see, and one of the scenes in it is really special if you like the Beatles, Paul McCartney is messing around and he starts doing the chord structure loosely of Get Back, one of their big hits, one of their many big hits, right? But you can see him, literally, his brain is noodling around and finding it until all of a sudden, boom, you hear the actual chord progression of Get Back. And then he starts working on the words to go with the chord progression. His mind has said, okay, this is the chord progression. Now, what is the song? Jojo down in Tucson, Arizona. No. And it's fascinating. But he could not have done that had he not developed his ear over years playing in Hamburg with the original Beatles, for, I think they did something like 8 hours a night playing songs and playing with each other. They could become the Beatles because that's where they became the Beatles. They did the work. They did the woodshedding. And, it sounds to me like that's exactly what you got out of Toastmasters, which was you got the venue, the opportunity, you got the ability to watch others for good, bad, and ugly. You decided to keep the good stuff and try to get rid of the bad and ugly stuff. And now you've gotten to the point where you're a veteran podcaster who has a platform that you can invite people on that can allow them to extend your messages, your personal brand beautifully. I mean, and again, so what comes first? I think the thing that comes first is the desire to become better than you currently are. Am I right on that? I see you shaking your head.
Amen to that. Heck, that's probably why it's in Think and Grow Rich. I think that's the first chapter, desire, right?
Yeah. Yeah, very much so. It's the desire. Here's the thing. I've seen this in my life too. The persistent people achieve, not the most talented.
Mm-hmm.
It's the persistent ones. So, oh man, it's so great talking with you, Dom, about this because I feel a kindred spirit in that. Have you ever heard of the psychological term, the rate breaker? There was a pretty famous, I don't know if it's sociological experiment or psychological experiment, but I think it was sociological, where, long story short, an assembly line. A sociologist wants to study the way the society that develops around an assembly line works. They have 10 units that have to be made per person, a quota of 10 units of whatever it is. Let's say 10 toasters. You have to assemble 10 toasters per hour. And so he gets someone, puts them on the line, but they have trained him up so he can make 12 toasters per hour. And so he goes, that guy starts making 12 toasters an hour. Everybody else is doing 10 an hour. What happens? That person who's breaking the rate doesn't have anyone to sit with at lunch. No one talks to them. Everyone kind of don't like him very much. The next week, purposely, they slow him down so he can only do 8 toasters per hour. What happens then? Everybody likes him. They sit with him at lunch. They invite him for drinks after work, all that stuff. Why? Because he's not breaking the accepted rate for everyone around them. I say this as a long-winded explanation for, I'm guessing that you and I share the same desire to break our own rates, to constantly make not just 12 toasters an hour, but 15. And not just make toasters, but let's make more challenging, more interesting things, more fulfilling stuff. If you surround yourself with rate breakers, like Toastmasters does, you're going to be inspired to continue to develop your ability to break those rates wherever you go. And again, this is not about being better than anyone else or whatever. It's no. It's not about you. It's about me. I want to be the best me possible. At the same time, I'm going to help you be the best you possible, because by making you better, I'll become better. If I can teach, I become a better learner. If I become a better learner, I become a better teacher. And I don't know about you, Dom, but I think that's probably describing you quite a bit too, right?
Oh, I agree. My man's preaching, baby.
Yeah, well, that's what I like to do, and it's not a surprise to anybody who knows my upbringing. I was a pastor's kid long time ago. So let me tell you, it's been a real treat to have Dom Brightmon on the Nonfiction Brand podcast. And again, I want to give you the opportunity to invite people to listen to your podcast and also read your books. Give us a few. What all do you have out there? Because as far as I can tell, you got a lot going on, my friend.
Oh, yeah. A lot going on and more to come indeed. Funny enough, my mantra for 2022 is go the distance. So let's see how far I can go the distance this year. And for those who want to keep in touch with yours truly and see how far I can go, head over to dombrightmon.com and got about 3 books out there. There's Going North, Tips and Techniques to Advance Yourself. Then there's the follow-up book, Stay the Course, The Elite Performer's 7 Secret Keys to Sustainable Success. And of course, the third book is a multi-author collaborative book called Crappy to Happy, Sacred Stories of Transformational Joy. And you can find information for all 3 of those books on dombrightmon.com. And be sure to subscribe to the Going North podcast, especially when yours truly gets to return the favor for DP and have him on the Going North podcast as well, because it's going to be fun in the bun.
Well, absolutely. And let me tell you, as 2 people on this podcast will currently attest, podcasts are such a great way to get yourself out of so many different things, out of your comfort zone, out of your box, and out into the world. So take advantage of such things and take a look at matching services like Podmatch. You can find that at podmatch.com. By the way, they don't pay me, but then again, I don't pay them. So I'm giving back to them. That's right. They're giving me a lot of great free service, so I'm going to give them a lot of great free promotion. Podmatch.com. That's Alex Sanfilippo's really great website. If you need to find only one place to go to get yourself on podcasts, let me recommend podmatch.com. All right, that's it for this week on the Nonfiction Brand podcast. With me today is the lovely and talented Dom Brightmon, but I want him to say that himself. So I'm going to restart my wrap-up of this podcast by saying, thanks for listening to this week's episode of the Nonfiction Brand podcast. As always, I'd love for you to like, subscribe, refer it to others, and also review it wherever you get fine podcasts for free, because that really, really helps other people find it. I'm DP Knudten, your host, and he is
Dom Brightmon.
And I'll be talking at you again next week. Bye-bye. All right, so Dom, I'm now going to do a little outro for our live stream because I'm wrapping up tonight's episode of IMNSHOW, and I want to thank you for watching and invite you to, whenever you see that DP's going live, join me. I'd love to see you again sometime in the future. But for now, I got to say goodbye. So I'll talk to you